Welcome back. You're still watching Daybreak on this 24th day of April 2023. My name is Sam Gituku and I want to introduce the panelists here in studio. I have Dr. James Nyikal, who is the Member of Parliament for Seme constituency. Good morning, Dr. Good morning. I have Senator Richard Onyonka from Kilifi County. Good morning.
Morning.
We missed you last time.
I'm very, very sorry. I overslept.
Simple.
I just overslept, so I by the time I was sending you the message, it was already 9:15.
Oh, goodness. You forgot to wake up.
Yes.
Okay. Then you have Dr. Eric Omolo, an advocate. Good morning.
Good morning, Sam. I didn't oversleep.
Yeah.
Unlike the senator.
You're right on time.
Thank you.
And we're still expecting John Kagusha, the Member of Parliament for Mukurweini constituency. When he joins us, he'll be on set. This morning, we're waking up to the very... What do you call it? Is it sad news or is it disturbing news? On the front page of the Daily Nation, the cult of death massacre as 39 bodies exhumed from mass graves, and the search continues. Yesterday, they retrieved some 18 bodies, and that is in Shakahola village in Kilifi County. And they are saying that the shocking deaths by starvation of members of a suspected cult continued to be unearthed yesterday, with 18 more bodies exhumed at Shakahola village in Kilifi County, even as authorities finally acknowledged the scale of the atrocity as a massacre. And police now also suspect that some of the victims didn't first to death but were killed before being buried. And as the search enters the fourth day today, the toll can only go up. And first of all, let me begin with you, Dr. Nyikal. What do you make of this? Because it's been some media reports over the past few days now ending up to what you heard at night. It looks like it's such a serious atrocity that may have occurred over a couple of weeks, months, and probably years. What do you make of this at this time?
Well, this is really shocking, and let me start by passing my apologies, my condolences to the relatives of the people who have died in this. It is shocking, and what is most surprising to me, it took so long before somebody noticed that something was not right. Cults are always there, and people have died in these cult movements. I think Uganda some time back, they burnt themselves in a house. There was an incident, I think some years back in South America, where people went into the jungle and over 1,000 people died. So cults do this. But what is disturbing is that all along, nobody noticed, even where they started off, where they started with a church in Malindi. They moved away and nobody was worried about that. And there was even, I think there was a report of some children's home officer who noticed that there was something amiss with the children that were in that cult and seemed to have reported. But that again, no cue was taken. So what is disturbing and surprising is that nobody took notice and nobody took action.
Right.
That's really what is disturbing to me.
Okay. Senator, what do you make of it?
Sam, if you look at the history of such outfits, whether those that have happened in Mexico, whether it's in America or wherever, and normally the followers of such groups will be victims of first a religious narrative. You'll find many of them are people who have reached a dead end, who are looking for an exit strategy. And very unfortunately, this is what happens. What surprises me, though, is I've constantly believed that our National Intelligence Service is quite a strong outfit. And it's a team that very rarely that does something pass through their fingers.
Right.
I think this time around, somebody really has to make an explanation, has to give Kenyans an explanation what happened and why it did happen. Also, the last point I wanted to raise is, you know, we Kenyans are very funny. When somebody discusses a matter that looks or sounds controversial, or which is outside the box, Kenyans are the first to jump up and want to lynch that person without even deeply looking at and listening to what that person is saying.
Right.
You remember this issue of regulation of church was brought by Honorable Madam Ida Odinga. And that time, I remember so many people were screaming at her, so many people were insulting her. The reality is our church leaves a lot to be desired. Our church must be interrogated, because at this rate, then we are going to end up somewhere. The only thing I know that we politicians do very well is that we are always very sly in not coming out and facing the church, even when we know that there could be critical issues. And the reason for that purely is because of our political survival. All right, if you look at the church that was there in Dr. Nyikal, 1980s, 90s, or even before that, the likes of Bishop Mwananzeki, Cardinal Tunga, you had the SEK Bishop Kuria. These were substantive people. These were people who, even when we were constantly having our political challenges, they knew when to come in, they knew when to engage the political class, and they understood what to do. But you see what has happened is, with this issue known as prosperity religion, where people are being told, I mean, you saw some of the stories out of this story, is how some of these parishioners sold their properties, how some of them stopped going to their jobs. And the other thing that I've also watched and observed, and I hope that we are going to do something about it, I don't think that in Kenya, the DCI or the police have taken the issue of missing persons very, very seriously. I don't think we have a record. If today you were to ask how many people do you think have been classified under the missing persons category? So in Kenya, it looks like when people miss and a report is put out there maybe to the local police station, after that nobody is interested. And I think for me, this is something that is very important. So that, because if you can have a record, and you've been seeing even on TV, people are coming now and they're saying, oh, you know, our relatives have died, some of them are missing, and the police is now engaged in this case, and yet we've been reporting that we have missing people. You remember the issue of Rivayala.
Right.
There were missing people there. I think we need to now re-engage and come up with a strategy how we can have a record and a way of following up on some of these missing person cases.
And Wakili, if you look at the statement from the Cabinet Secretary for Interior Affairs, that is Professor Kithure Kindiki, he says that enough security officers have been deployed and the entire 800-acre forest is sealed off and declared a scene of crime, but also says that while the multi-agency security team on site is doing their best to unearth the truth and prevent further loss of lives, I have directed the Regional Commissioner for Coast Region, together with the regional security team, to reinforce the team in Malindi ahead of his visit on Tuesday. He also mentions a few things of how religious organizations do what he's calling self-regulation. But this statement coming yesterday after several days of reporting and the concerns that they have expressed about NIS never sensing that there's such a thing happening. What does it then say about our preparedness to deal with such issues?
Well, this is very unfortunate, Sam. I don't know how this slipped through. It's not true that the churches are not regulated in Kenya. They are mostly registered under a register of societies. From around 2014, I've personally tried to register 2 churches. From around 2014, the government stopped registering churches, but they are still regulated, and so it worries me that we could lose so many people like we've lost in Malindi without this being noticed. Remember, every death also has to be registered. So once somebody passes on, before you bury, at the very least, people need to get what's called burial permit, which means it is acknowledged that somebody has passed on. And for the most part, you also have to indicate the cause of death, whether it's an accident, whether it's a particular disease, cancer, or whatever. How this could have happened, 30, 40 people in Malindi and not noticed, is very unfortunate, but it also speaks to something that I think we need to have a conversation about in Kenya, the place of religion in our society. Is religion designed to bring national cohesion in terms of social support, or religion has become a tool for manipulation? Part of the problem we have, Sam, in Kenya is that religion, for the most part, is a tool for manipulation, and for the most part, to avoid serious conversations about governance in the country. It's very unfortunate because...
What do you mean it's a tool for manipulation?
I'll explain. You know, Dr. Nyikal is my friend, Senator Nyonka is my friend, Kagusha, I follow him a lot. I know they are nice people, they mean well in terms of governance in the country, but it's unfortunate that politicians in this country are the ones using religion to manipulate social thought. The bigger point is they don't put religious leaders to account. And church is normally used as a pedestal, really, to rise to political office. And of course, the less said about that, the better. But what we are talking about now is that we really need to rein in on churches, enhance regulation. If there's need for a new legislation, I think probably it needs to move from Registrar of Societies to a more regulated Act of Parliament that controls mushrooming of churches. There's a time I used to visit Kibera a lot. And I noticed Kibera is headquarters of almost every church in this country. If you go to Kibera, you probably find churches claiming to be headquartered there, well over 100. And you keep wondering, okay, how did they come about? And importantly, who is really the head? And the more you talk to the churchgoers there, the more realize these are just businesses. So we really need to rein in on this. I support Professor Kindiki on his actions against this particular religious leader in Mombasa, but I also wonder how this slipped through. I mean, 30, 40 people dying within a span of, say, months. But I've read that this guy started this thing around 2015, and it's like a police state because people don't want to talk. In a country that we thrive on freedom of expression and all this, I think they need to do something. But they also don't need to be reactionary. You don't go hard when you've lost it. You try to understand the psychology around it. How can people just starve to death? You need to understand that. All right.
Let me introduce the Member of Parliament for Mukureni constituency, John Kagusha. Good morning.
Good morning, Sam.
Great. And you're talking about the unfortunate story about what Kithure Kindiki, the professor, is calling massacre of 39 so far and counting. Starving to death, also suspected that some may have been killed before they starved to death. But really, because they all raise serious issues about where was the intelligence service, where the police, raises questions about the regulation of churches. But how really do you get to unearth all these factors so that you have a proper solution, even as you reflect on what religion means for the Kenyan society?
I would like to look at this issue from 3 angles. Of course, the first one would have is the religion in Kenya and how religious we are as a people and how this contributes to our own environment and setup, the way we live as Kenyans. And religion, if you look at it, is at the center of our lives. If you go to any family or any individuals, you'll find that church activities and spiritual issues do form or make a very large percentage of their life on a day-to-day basis. And I think that is why at some point people have used this sometimes negatively. Now, when you look at this religious or religion issue, now it's also bringing now an issue of our psychological well-being as a country. If you look at what is happening here, you will find, as much as we have been talking about the mental well-being of Kenyans, there's something wanting very seriously, because if one can get so brainwashed by a cult leader to the extent that they sacrifice their own life, it shows that that person has serious deficiencies in their own mental well-being. And probably that's something that we need to look at as a country. We need to look at how are we helping ourselves to retain our sanity and our mental health as a country. And you find we also have a challenge here, because it seems like our people are quite gullible, and many of the people do submit themselves to these brainwashing and manipulation tendencies which are being forced by some of these preachers. Now, even though church registration may have been stopped some time ago, you find we still have had people registering through other names. We have had ministries, we have had, what do you call them? We have many, many different categories that now people bring for registration. Mm-hmm. And as my brother here is talking about church being headquartered in Kibera, you'll find that mainly the people who are affected by these church and spiritual and religious dogma are usually the low cadre people in the country. Mm-hmm. And also, that also has also to do with the literacy levels. Some of those people who are not very well endowed are not are easily gullible, are easily manipulated, are easily brainwashed. Now, this does not mean that it's only those people who are low in the society who are brainwashed. We also have a few people, but very few, who are in the middle class or who are elite who would get to this level. As you can see, we have one case here which has been demonstrated of someone who was, I think, a hostess, and found themselves in this cult and also perished in the cult. Now, the other angle that we have to look at, and I believe the honorable members here have looked at it, is the issue of the security angle. Mm-hmm. Now, it's also showing, or it's also coming out that religion is also becoming a security threat. It's also becoming a security issue in the country. And this ought not to be the case. But now we are here. It shows that it's not every person who is setting up a church or a ministry or whatever it is that they call it, that is having good intentions. And you know, sometimes you have been seen to be cheering some of these people. You know, we have serious cults in this country that seems to be earning respect from politicians and from other leaders and have very big followership. I know, for example, one of the cult leaders in this country who have immensely benefited from these from his gullible followers. I know one woman who sold a huge tract of land worth billions of shillings and deposited all the money to one of the cult leaders in this country. Another one, and it has been an ongoing case where they surrendered their high-rise, high-value property in serious big estates in this city, not far from where we are seated today, and donated that high-value property to a cult leader in the country. Now, we seem to be quiet about this, and our hands are tied. We don't seem to be taking any action about this. So it's high time we look at it that way. It's a security issue because it is interfering with property rights. It's a security issue because people are dying out of this. And it's very unfortunate because this has also exposed our intelligence services very negatively. And I have said this before. Our intelligence services seems to be much more politicized than functional and serving this country for the good. If you look at some of the surprises we get to, I mean, you get very shocked that we are being surprised by things that we have employed people to work on.
What do you mean that intelligence system is politicized?
It's much more politicized. If you look at, for example, for that period of time, the intelligence services were there in this country active. But what do? They're mainly following politicians and political activities. If you look at even our intelligence people on the ground, what do they report on a daily basis? Theirs is the interest of who came where, what did they say, who was he, what level, are you getting? And at that time, very serious other social ills are happening underneath. And they are not exposing them, or they are not interested, because even their bosses may not be interested.
So they're still pursuing politics now?
I mean, that's how our intelligence services have been like. One has to work very seriously to change the thinking, because I'm sure even where they are today, mm-hmm. what they think And what they imagine is their services are much more politically needed than needed for helping the society. And I would want to dissuade them. I would also want even our Excellency President, I know he has repeatedly talked about using the civil service for the work or engaging them in the work that they're supposed to be doing, including the provincial administration. They have they have repeatedly talked about this. And I would want the civil service, I would want the intelligence services to actually get that cue and follow the right way, because how on earth would we get this shock when we had people paid, people who are paid from our taxpayers' money, people who are paid from exchequer to give intelligence to government so that action is taken where we have social ills which are acting against the society itself. How would you explain that this happened? But then also, you also need to also look at this issue in a more deeper way. My question is, who has been digging these graves? Yeah? Are you saying these starved people have also been digging the graves for those who have died? I mean, you look at the number of graves that are being exposed and you ask yourself questions. Is this pastor the one who digs these graves? Who does that? I mean, who has been coordinating all this? Who has known how all this is going, and who benefits also from all these deaths and all that? So there's very serious issues of underworld also happening here, and also there also could be participation of other people other than the pastor himself. And also the other question is, are all these people buried here really have to do with this cult, or do you also have other hidden issues, beyond this cult?
Those are interesting questions. And
let me just raise one little point.
Yes, Dr.
The issue about religion and churches and morality in a country, and say, in our case, corruption. Does religion actually determine the morality of the country, or the religion actually takes what is going on in the country and it's part, or churches to that matter, is just part and parcel of the morals of a country? I think there was some study that I saw, a very small study that related that in countries where there's a very high level of corruption, the number of churches and new churches being registered is actually very high. So you wonder, what drives what? Is it religion that drives the moral status of a country, or it's actually the moral status that has been developed in the whole country that drives churches in particular? And the other thing he raised is, they are not only the security system. What about the social system? Like in this case, the children's department, a lot of people have died there, some are children. And a children's officer or somebody working in a children's home actually raised an issue far back, way back, and nobody seems to respond. So we also look at our social structures, the social systems, the social department. How do you respond to people?
Right.
And the other one is the freedom of religion. And related also to mental illness. There's one thing about mental illness that many people don't realize, that people who are mentally unwell do not know they are unwell. So if you wait for them to come and look for help, they will not. So if you have a large number of people who have borderline mental illnesses attracted to this, they will fight very strongly. This is their right, the freedom to worship as they want, and people probably tend it. We may have to look at sometimes in churches when cultist movements start to appear, and it's not difficult to tell in what is happening in cultist movements, and say, are those people who are there all well? Or are some of them ill? Like, one of the major symptoms of mental illness is sudden change of religious belief. Somebody who was probably not known to be very religious, if they suddenly become very religious, that may be the first sign. So I think relation to mental health, security, and also our social structure and government social systems, those are areas that we really have to look at in the future in regard to this.
Very interesting. And Senator, because if you look at the history of the church, of course, being brought into the country by missionaries, and over the past maybe 20 years or so, we've had a lot of, should I say, churches starting off from the Kenyan society, not necessarily coming in through missionaries. Is there a way of putting a stop to that, despite the freedom of religions, that you don't go to Kibra, like he says, and every few steps you make, there's a church?
Headquarter, not a church. Headquarter.
I think, Sammy, the truth is, like you're raising that question, I believe that the church has done some tremendously wonderful things in our country. The church has started health facilities, the church has created schools, and the church has participated in the development of our country. And in reality, like somebody said many, many years ago, Karl Marx, he said, religion is the opium of the masses. The truth is, there is a big debate and discussion that I believe that needs to go on. For example, if you watch your TV and you see some of the things which are going on, like in the US, with these religious organizations where you literally look at even some of the advertisements and what they're asking on TV, and how some of these high priests of some of those churches will cry on TV asking that they need to have a private jet. I mean, you've seen those scenarios. You've had cases where in Nigeria, church members will be told the Lordship King has said this is what he wants and you must raise it for them. And yet, I remember historically my church, and I'm Catholic, was very deliberate in taking care of the vulnerable, was very deliberate in bringing out issues which were affecting society. My church was always there when issues of human rights came up.
Right.
And yet, as Professor Nyikal has said, the scenario, the development that is taking place in our country, the inability of our people to even feed themselves, the inability of our people to even take their children to school. In other words, all the tenets of poverty, when you look at them, have driven our people farther away from the midstream, from the middle ground of normal human existence, to the scenario where you have now. The easiest way you'll find, because of the challenges we face at a personal level, individually and as communities, everything is going to church. And as my brother here has said, it is true that politicians have been the bad behavioralists in all this. I mean, how many times have you seen us going to church carrying loads and loads of money? And yet nobody questions where we are getting this money from. How does an individual contribute 2 million shillings or 5 million in a church? Once I attended a church function, Sam, and it was my last or second rally when I was running for MP. And one of my opponents walked into the church, and he had about 10 people, and each one of them was pushing a wheelbarrow. And on that wheelbarrow were loads and loads of cash. Everybody in church was shocked. I mean, where did this individual get $1 million shillings?
How much was it?
It was $1 million bob. Every wheelbarrow was carrying 100,000. You can imagine you're a candidate and your opponent has done that, how you want to run away. You fear God. When you see the opponent, you can't even speak. And yet, if you look at the moral of the story, and this happened sincerely, it's a true story, how do you get a church to accept such behavior of its members, or even somebody who's bringing money to the church? And what is the implication of such an action?
I didn't think 100,000 is that heavy.
It depends on the denomination.
It was the denomination. It was thousands. It was thousands.
You know, Sam, I think one of the challenges that we have is that we always want to trivialize and politicize even very serious matters. You know, we are looking at the issues of cults, and we are looking at the issue of how people are brainwashed. And by the way, in some countries, I don't think we have had that one here, but I think in countries like South Africa, we have seen some of those cults where they force sexual activity on women, sometimes in very bizarre manner. And we have had very, very weird kind of cults around the world, over the years. And we are looking at something that is much more sophisticated. I don't think we would need to try and narrow down this one into, again, the Kenya Kwanza Azimio contest again, because I don't think this one has any of this. I mean, when someone talks about someone who went with 100,000 in a wheelbarrow in a church,
I think he's getting it out of context. He's getting it out of context.
I didn't even say it was him. Now you see he's saying it.
Let's not go there.
We need to look at we need to look at how.
Let's not go there. I'm just looking at Article 32 of the Constitution: freedom of conscience, religion, belief, and opinion. And Sub-Article 2 talks about every person has the right, either individually or in community with others, in public or in private, to manifest any religion or belief through worship, practice, teaching, or observance, including observance of a day of worship. And I'm just wondering, because it's quite open, and probably because of the good intentions, but how do you limit this so that you don't have situations like what you are seeing now with the excuse of its religion, Daktari?
Yeah, Sam, you probably didn't know me as somebody who defends civil liberties, including unpopular ones like freedom of worship, LGBTQ+, those things that people don't want to talk about. But I defend them not because I agree with them, but because I just believe it's important to defend civil liberties. Then you claw back based on reasonable interventions that society needs to have. So a good starting point is that we must defend freedom of religion, freedom of worship. And we must allow churches to operate independently, but also within the social context of Kenya. So I think that this has absolutely nothing to do with the political divide in Kenya. Both sides, anyway, are guilty of spending a lot of money in church and using church to manipulate us in terms of governance, in terms of not questioning corruption and all that. Because, I mean, unless you don't live in Kenya, everyone knows that the money they take to church is corruptly acquired. It's obvious. The less said about that, the better. But I think that a good context that many Kenyans will identify with is what we had at NYS when it didn't have a kind of corporate governance structure that then will detect and control the alleged graft incidences that happened there. So I think. And by the way, it is not very difficult to also tell that churches that are governed in a corporate way, where no individual is kind of the superhero, are more moderate than churches where one person emerges as kind of the real guy, So we need to probably, and I expect my friends here who are all in Parliament and Senate to come up with a legislation that intervenes in terms of introducing corporate governance in churches, including churches having boards. So you need to have a board of governors outside the presiding bishop or presiding cardinal or presiding pope, whatever name they want to call themselves. But you have a corporate board, a board that also rotates. You see, when you have one person becoming chair of the board for 10 years, then the person is likely to then overlook his oversight or her oversight roles. So I think we need to really move in fast and regulate churches in a corporate governance way by having churches have either boards of governors or boards of trustees where the pastors, and last time we were here with some pastors debating a different thing, where the pastors are first paid. They need to be paid because it's a job. But importantly, that pay needs to be regulated. And where what they call tithes. And by the way, most people around my age, the so-called middle class, no longer go to church. Partly because immediately you go there, you see a lot of manipulation. And you see a lot of people who don't want to be questioned, particularly the so-called evangelical churches. So let's move forward. Let's be progressive. Let's not overreact to what has happened in Malindi, because the fact that it happened means that the structures for governing churches has failed, and come up with a proper legislation that does not limit freedom of religion, because that's very important. But importantly, ensures that pastors, bishops, cardinals are accountable, including, by the way, I'm also a Catholic, including the Catholic Church, that then moderates their messaging. because a few Catholic bishops and priests are also a bit extreme in positions they take. Yet, you know, by and large, churches have kind of a mixture of everyone. People with different positions, social, economic, and of course, in terms of rights. So let's be progressive. Let's come up with the right legal intervention to govern churches. But importantly, let also politicians claw back a bit. You know, even if you have money, you don't really have to show people in church that you have money. You really don't have to.
Let me say something about this church and politics and into this.
Let's take a short break.
For me, I was going to talk about sound pollution, how churches are now...
Can you take a break first and then you come back?
And I hope they don't see it as an attack on them.
No, it's not. No. Let us be candid.
It's an area we should look at.
And it's an area we have to start discussing.
We're back shortly.